Hi everyone, thank you. My name is Miro Kazakoff. I'm a senior lecturer here at the MIT Sloan School of Management, where I teach in our management communications group. I actually specialize in data communications, so how we talk about data and numbers. But my whole career prior to joining academia and teaching was spent in sales and client service. And so this series is some of the greatest hits of things that I thought were really critical skills that I learned in sales and client service that I think are fundamental for any business professional. It's designed as a class for people who don't have prior sales experience, maybe coming in from engineering or other fields and are early. This is sort of a newer part of their career, but I'm hopeful that you'll find the concepts and the practice valuable throughout. Today is our session 4, which is on questions. And questions are the primary tool that we have in sales in order to be able to move prospects to the close. Fundamental thing that I believe and that I have seen, which is that good sales is about asking questions, not answering them, and it's about listening, not talking. What makes talented sales professionals really good is that they ask good questions and that they listen really carefully to the answers. And that's actually where your skill comes from. The answering and the talking part is not actually as hard, I think, as the asking good questions and really listening. And everyone tends to want to jump to session 5, which Marcus talked about, which is closing. It's like, well, we can just attend session 5 and we'll know how to close, and then why would we even bother coming to the other 4? And the answer for that is really today here, which is that your effectiveness at closing, your effectiveness at closing is entirely dependent on how you have worked the process up to the point of the close. And in particular, really good closing is about holding people accountable to things that they said earlier in the process. And you can only hold them accountable to things if they have said them. So things around timeline and urgency and how decisions are made and what's important to the organization. If you don't have the honest answers to those questions, then you can't, in the closing process, hold people accountable to what they said before. So that's why we're going to talk so much about the process of asking questions today. Many of you have been exposed to these concepts before, but it will be a chance for us to practice them again. And we're going to talk about that. Feel free if you have questions at any point to raise your hand, to interrupt me. I'll be happy to answer them. I may ask that we move along in order to keep us on time. So my trade here is you can ask anything you want, anytime you want, at any point in it, if I'm allowed to say, hey, it's a really good question, but we have a timing thing that I just want us to be able to hit. Fair trade? All right, same for online. Great. Cool. So review of a couple of concepts from before. Actually, let's full on start out with an exercise. I'm gonna need 2 people to write during this exercise. That's all you're gonna have to do, is just write. Can I have 2 volunteers? Okay, we got 1 here and 1 here. Thank you. All right, so come on up. Come up here. And what I'm going to say, it's Shauna and Jaya. So I'm going to ask, the audience is going to be asking me questions in role, and I'm going to ask you to alternate who writes down the question that's being asked. So you'll write the first question, then you'll write the second, and you'll go back and forth. Pay really close attention to trying to capture the first couple of words of the question. It'll be hard to get the whole thing out, but really try to get the first few words of the question down. Make sense? All right, cool. So we're going to do a sales prospect scenario. We're going to do a pretty straightforward one here to think about questions. The prospect here is that you are all wedding planners, a career you may or may not be excited to discover that you've just landed in. You're very well qualified for it, very talented at it. And I'm a prospect coming to see you about potentially engaging you as a wedding planner. And so let's talk about this prospect situation, and we're going to start with the part where you're going to ask me some questions. And so let's go through that process and we'll see where we get. So go ahead, raise a hand, and what are some questions that you want to ask me? Yeah.
What would your perfect wedding look
Oh, my perfect wedding. What would my perfect wedding look like? My perfect wedding would probably be some point in June. Love to have part of it outside, if at all possible. Food is really important to me, really high quality food. We want to have about a medium size there, and a really feeling of, just like a feeling of calm and comfort. I think weddings can be really stiff and formal, and I'd like something that feels easy. I'm also not a big partier, so I've imagined something maybe that's midday.
I think this is an expectation. Where would you like this to be? What time of year?
Yeah.
And how big is this?
Yeah, so we booked it for June 16th. We've booked the Hampshire House it's the facility above Cheers, and we have 300 people that we've invited thus far. What aspects of the wedding am I most worried about? My mother.
What worries you about your mother?
Oh, many things. Her interaction with my fiance.
Besides yourself, is there anyone else that will dictate this function in terms of size, scope, decoration?
No, me and my fiance.
Just you?
Me and my fiance.
Is she going to be with you the next meeting?
Yeah. She wasn't able to be here today, but yeah.
What's your budget?
Our budget is $25,000.
You said you wanted cool and casual. Is that what you said was important to you?
Yes.
And what other events have you been to that kind of captured that?
Other events that capture that. Boss used to throw a garden party every year at his house, his backyard. I really enjoyed that. It always seemed to be warm. There was lots of kids running around. It wasn't particularly stuffy in dress. People could come and go. I really liked the vibe of that.
What would you like to replicate from a friend's wedding that you've been to?
My friend Drea, when she got married, the family just looked so happy together. Everyone looked so happy.
You mentioned you had a budget of $25K.
Yeah.
I assume you've already taken care of the venue outside of that budget. What
Yeah.
would you imagine spending that $25K?
Well, so the $25K, that's currently our budget. So we've booked the venue, we've picked the caterer, we have a photographer, we've gotten the wedding dress, and we've done invites, accommodations, we've handled booking for everyone, we figured out the decorations, the lighting, the DJ, and all of that. When we spent that all tallied up to $25,000.
That's $25,000 so far.
Yeah.
What budget do you have left for any?
Probably another $5K-ish left.
So let's, I'm just going to jump in. Let's use the mic.
Oh, right.
Because
I'm sorry.
online, and even
Yes.
if you talk quietly,
Yes.
hear you back.
So Dan.
So what do you want a wedding planner to do for you?
Manage my mother.
Okay.
What scares you about your mother and your wedding?
Yeah, so my mother and my fiance do not get along. And I am worried about her being on my fiance the entire time and ruining my fiance's time at the wedding. So let's call it there. So a really interesting thing happened here, which doesn't usually happen in this. It was from some questions over here. But so when we first started this, before we begun, what were you assuming that were going to be the things that were important to know about me? Or actually, what were you assuming about why I wanted a wedding planner? Yeah, so say more about that.
So traditional role of a planner,
Yep.
booking,
Yep.
all the details that you said you had already done.
Yeah. So this weird thing happened, right, where I'd already done those things, and actually you caught this the first, which was what was the real issue that I had?
That you were worried about your mother's interactions with your fiance.
Yeah. And actually, you got to it quite early, and then I decided I didn't want the activity to go that fast. And I want to talk about a thing that happened here. So I want to go through the questions, and we can talk a little bit about what actually happened as we were going through here. Because we have this issue, thank you. We have this issue with prospects, where we have this pretty clear idea about what they are looking for. But we don't want to impose upon them our mental view of what we think they want. Prospects buy for their reasons. People buy things for their own reasons, not your reasons. And asking good questions is about getting those reasons. 40% of the time, maybe more as you get good at this, you're going to know what the answer is. And you're going to know what the prospect's needs are. But being good at sales is about that, let's say 20%, where it's not what's necessarily in your mind. And it's about getting really good at the very, very specific reason why the individual person's going to buy.
So what percentage of the buyers know why they want to buy?
We're going to talk about this in a second, but the answer is it depends. And what I'm going to suggest to you through the course of today is they know in the sense of it's discoverable within them. Two things. They don't want to share it with you because it's scary and it gives you power over them. And so you have to treat it very carefully. And there are times where they're not always clear. So let's even suggest that here, that maybe I showed up not completely clear what was going on. And let's go through the questions. Some of you have heard of the difference between closed-ended questions and open-ended questions. Who wants to quickly go through what is a closed-ended question versus an open-ended question?
I don't know the example, but a close it would have a yes/no answer.
Yeah.
Open invites you to talk more.
Yeah. So let's look at the questions here and see what we got. So what would your perfect wedding look like? Closed-ended or open-ended question? Open-ended question, yeah. Great place to start. Interestingly, I do this activity, rarely do people start here. It's actually very uncommon. Then we said, where would you like this to be? Closed-ended or open-ended? Closed. Yeah, so this is technically a closed-ended question, the way it's framed right now. What aspects are you most worried about? Open. And what was my response here?
Your mother?
Yeah, so this is actually where I first said my mother. And there's a really interesting thing that was going on in my head here that actually goes on in prospects' heads too, which is I'm embarrassed. In this role that I'm playing, I'm embarrassed about this phenomenon, which often prospects will be, that they're often coming to you because there are problems in their business or things that they should be able to solve that they can't. And it's really vulnerable to say those things. But you asked this very open-ended question, and the actual thing that I thought was, I was not able to come up with any other answer other than the truth, because there was no way to dodge. What worries you most about your mother? Open or closed? Open, yeah. And so here, I think you might have been able to get me to go into more detail, which I did later on, but I decided it was a little too much too fast, and I wanted to go, and I wanted to slow down. So I gave a really cagey response to this question. And so let's see what happens. So then, besides yourself, anyone else who dictates the size and scope, open or closed? Closed. What is your budget, open or closed? Closed. What other events have you been to that are like that? Yeah, this one's open, although it's an interesting phenomenon. We'll call it open here. So notice something that happens, which is I get cagey about this thing that is emotionally significant to me. And then you tend to respond by seeing that discomfort on me and moving to closed-ended questions because they're easier emotionally for both of us. Because I've said something that's actually uncomfortable. And so you move into closed-ended questions, which lets me avoid the discomfort. One of the big things that I want to push you on today is to lean into that discomfort. that actually when you're getting that sense of discomfort from someone that you're talking to, that is actually a sign that you're hitting something significant. And part of your challenge is to ask questions with a genuine intent to genuinely want to know what the answer is, to genuinely know what the answer is, and such that you are going to use this information to help the person you are selling to achieve something that they want to achieve. And I think that mindset's really important because that's the only way that you're going to be able to get people to open up to you here. Because there was a way that you could lean into the topic of my mother, which we did a little bit later on, but we wanted to sort of back off here, and I signaled that.
Yeah, I just have a question. Might
Yeah.
be jumping a couple steps
Yeah.
ahead here, but like, so for like this question about worried about your mother or
Yeah.
other events, those are sort of open-ended questions, but like, wouldn't the goal be, you want to like lean into that, but the goal would be to get you to define some like closed-ended things there. So when you look at like metrics of success,
Yep.
like, oh, we avoided, your mother
Yeah.
having an episode with your fiance or
Yeah.
whatever it is.
Yeah. So wouldn't you want to get to metrics? Yes, absolutely. And some of the examples you gave are some of my success metrics. But you can only get to them, the real ones that matter to me, after you have gotten a really clear understanding of what my issues are. So I am not saying that you should only ask open-ended questions. Closed-ended questions have a critical role in it. Things like, what is my budget, is a really critical question for this process. But that in general, to think about starting open and getting a really clear sense of what the pain is, and then you can move to closed with the metrics. So we move into close, and we start actually, interestingly, what would you like to replicate from your friend's wedding, open or closed? Oh yeah, I think that counts as open. I'm like borderline here. Budget of $25K. I assume you took care of the venue. What would $25K cover? Open or closed? Closed, yeah. And so I did a thing here that was a signal. What did you notice about my response when you asked that question? Because I had a strange response, right?
Mm-hmm.
What did I do?
Well, I think you detailed all of the things, listed them one by one,
Yeah.
exhaustively.
Yeah.
Which showed that, indicated to me that my assumption that I was going to be the wedding planner was probably incorrect.
So
you wanted a different service.
Right. So interesting. We have to be super careful with this assumption. I did something unexpected. And we want to really tune up our sensitivity to this. Because the fact that I did something unexpected was a signal. And you'll notice the questions change right after this, because I just did something super weird, which is I detailed all of the decisions that had already been made. But the assumption on that I didn't want you as a wedding planner is actually not correct. It turned out that I didn't want you to do those things. So we want to be really careful about listening for moments where there's emotion or moments where people answer these questions in these strange ways, but also be really careful not to assume what that means. It's a time to lean in and to ask more questions and more open-ended questions. So redoing that, actually, so then what was the question that follows next? What would a wedding planner do for you, open or closed? Yeah, so it's an open question. And it's a good response question to that. Because it's like, look, it sounds like you don't want a wedding planner. It sounds like you've done all the things already. I forget what budget you have left. This one actually might have come. Yeah, so these two go together here, yeah. All right. And then finally, what scares you about your mother, open or closed? Open. Which is where I finally revealed what I was worried about and gave you the moment to be able to say, oh, here's what we could offer to you as a wedding planner, here's what we could do. And a time to then start thinking about, okay, how do we solve that problem? So big things to take away from you. You have these two big tools, open and closed-ended questions. They're both useful tools. But you want to think in general, not always, about starting with open-ended questions or using open-ended questions early to figure out what the issues are for the person. And then use closed-ended questions to zoom in on things later on, where we might have had a very closed-ended question, which is like, do you want me to show up at 7 a.m.? Do you want me to call her ahead of time? Like, do you want me to do these specific things? Then we can move into those closed-ended things. And so we're going to practice this skill today because it's really hard to train yourself to do this. It's not actually particularly natural. You are all doing a great job here of starting with open ones. So we said we have open and closed. Closed. We said listen for emotion. Those are really critical triggers. And I don't have a good explanation of this, but it's like anything weird. Like anything that feels off. But don't assume what the answer is on it. To push into this. So open-ended versus closed-ended, listen for emotion for anything off. And there's one thing you didn't do here that sometimes people do, which is don't bound your questions. So sometimes what people will do is they'll take an open-ended question and then they'll add bounds on this to the end of it. So this would be something like, what do you want a wedding planner to do? We could focus more on planning the service, or we could focus more on coordinating the vendors. And it's a thing that people will do out of anxiety is they'll ask an open-ended one and then they'll want to put bounds on it really fast. It is your ability to tolerate this discomfort that comes from this that will be your ability to sell. Questions here. We're going to talk about a few more concepts and then do an exercise. Yeah.
I'm sure you're getting to this too, but like
Yeah.
we sort of, or it sounded like most of us went in assuming you wanted a wedding planner to do all these details, and then
A totally reasonable assumption, right? That's gonna be right most of the time.
and then we quickly realized that wasn't the case, and you maybe needed someone to manage your mother. And like in that case, what if that's
I should be
not-
super clear. The person in the role that I was playing in this needed someone to manage my mother. This is going on the internet, so we're gonna very clearly separate those
in
two
this
things.
hypothetical situation?
Thank you.
But like, what if that's not within my comfort level as a wedding planner?
Yeah.
Like, now that I understand your need,
Yeah.
can I actually address it?
Well, I'll run out the prospect scenario for you, which is a prospect and someone that you're talking to comes and outlines for you a clear need that you genuinely cannot address with your product. What do you do?
That's why I'm here. I don't know.
Well, I would say two things. One, you want to make clear to them that this isn't a service that you can take on and solve. But then you also want to leave them with as much information as you can provide. So help them, steer them towards resources that will solve the problem for them if you can.
Yeah. I'm going to sum up that as be a professional, but there are people who have needs that you can't solve. And so obviously the best answer that we want in sales is a yes. People will be like, oh yeah, I want to buy that. I've covered this with some folks before, we've been there before. So what's the second best thing? A no. So that actually the thing that you want to avoid is the maybe. That's the worst. So you have the benefit in this situation of you've gotten to a no fast. And to not be afraid of getting that no quickly.
So what if, we have a lot of excitement with customers about a product and they have a lot of questions to ask, and then they say, could you also do this? Could you also do that? And we kind of lose focus. So how do we get the questions back?
Yeah.
in their court.
Yeah. All right. So this speaks to, I think it's a good transition for some of the things that when we're asking questions we want to go for. We've covered this in some of our prior sessions. So one of the first things that we want to do is we want to qualify people. People can only buy if they're qualified. This gets at your issue. We talked about there's different qualifications for different companies, but by sort of definition, at least one model is this model of BANT. That in order to be qualified, you need to have budget, to be able to afford what you're offering. You need to have authority. You need to have a need that your organization can solve. The case that you brought up was a case where you're like, actually, you have a need. Well, I'm technically a wedding planner. You have a need that I cannot solve, which I encourage you to be honest about. And you have timing. All of these are things that the people that you are talking to, answering all of these questions involves being vulnerable. How much budget do you have available? Powerful information. Who has the authority genuinely to make this decision? Really a really deceptively sensitive thing. So people, of course, say, me. There's no, in any organization that's large, there's a more complicated answer to it. What is their genuine need, which we'll talk about in a second. And of course, we talk about what is the timing. What is actually the thing that is going to force them to make this decision? So to get at these things, I'm going to suggest open-ended questions to do it. And I want to also, we talked in the first session about the types of need. And so that one model for this is to think about these in three levels. This model of pain. What's the pain that the person has? And that there's business pain. Stated pain. Sometimes this is called bullshit pain, which is whatever they actually called you up to say. And take it as an assumption that whatever they called you up to say is probably not the actual pain that they have in the organization. Things that you might have heard of reasons why people call. Oh, we wanted to meet you. Oh, you sounded interesting. Oh, we like to keep an eye on all of these technologies. What's one? We wanted to talk to you because here at our business development organization, we're really excited about what you're doing. That is not actually a pain that an organization has, though it's a thing you probably hear really often. It's not a reason why people are going to buy.
Okay, so I have a kind of related question.
Yeah.
We're a startup and we're sending out a lot of emails to bigger companies that we want to partner with, and ultimately we want them to pay us money to do things for them.
Yep.
And my emails are kind of dishonest, like you're saying. My emails are like, oh, I'm reaching out to you because you have a lot of collaborative interests and you're working in this space. I'm doing all this stuff in my space. Could we meet? Because it seems like there's a lot of overlap.
Yeah.
Would love to chat. Should I be being more honest?
Well, what would more honest look like?
I mean, so like what I don't think I should say, but is the fully honest thing is I really want my first partnership and you're a company that I could do that with. I really want my first paid partnership and you are a company that could be that for me.
Yeah. So
like where on the spectrum should you be?
Yeah, and because it is a spectrum is a hard thing here because we're really thinking about how do we manage our time really effectively. I can answer this easier as you get to a little later stage, which is as you get clarity around these things, which is what is the budget that we need in order to be able, like how much is our product going to cost and what's the budget needed for it? Who are the types of people who make these decisions? What is the need we really solve? And this one's a lot more out of your control, like what's the timing of when people make these decisions? When you get clear about these, you'll be able to write clearer emails because you'll have clear answers to them. And so what I would see, I'm twisting this, but what I'm hearing in my mind is, what I hear that is actually, it's like, Miro, I'm actually not sure what the answers to these things are yet. Mm-hmm. So I actually genuinely do just want to talk to people in order to start figuring out where we might be able to play. So I don't think it is dishonest at this point.
Okay.
But you should be clear about what you actually are on the search for, I think, which is you're on the search for figuring out what these things look like for your organization. And once you start actually figuring out this is the thing that we do that solves this common business problem, you're not going to write, can we just talk emails? You're actually going to find yourself writing versions of like, do you have this problem? Mm-hmm. If you do, we should talk because I think I can help solve it. And so, but in early stages, it's like, no, you're actually looking to just talk because you're not sure. What else?
So yeah, so like in the hypothetical situation we just did with the wedding planner, like would you ideally want to know all of this stuff before you get to the stage of meeting with a wedding planner? Like if you know, I know my skills, like
So in a perfect world, you'd have all this information and you would never even meet with the person, they would just sign a contract, right? So in a perfect world, that's the case. It's great to have this information ahead of time if you can, but there comes some point where you're getting this information from someone. This series focuses on businesses and sales processes where we get this information by talking to people. There's a whole set of consumer businesses where they don't get this information by talking to people. You just go online, you fill out forms, you sort of qualify yourself. At some point, you're going to have a meeting, and we're going to get information, and that's what we're focused on here. So that's the case for this series. So you're talking about stated pain. It's whatever they say. The next one here is business pain. And business pain feels really different because business pain has associated with it measurable results, timing constraints, and so now we have things that are commitments that we can talk about addressing, which is like, oh, you have this pain because you need to reach this goal in this time period. Well, now you have a pain that I could potentially sell my product against because it may be possible to be able to affect that measurement. And so we want to get to here. The deepest level that you can get to is personal pain. And this is, how does the thing that I'm experiencing affect me individually within this organization? I'm going to suggest to you that it is possible, though very hard, but possible on one meeting to get all the way down to this. And that if you get here, the benefits of personal pain, which are usually things about ego, job status. So this is promotions, hiring, firing. There's subcategories of this, but these are some of the big ones. They all tend to roll up into that. But these you can only solve once the product works. These you can potentially solve by just selling the product. So the example is I co-founded an education technology company called Testive that does test preparation for people, mostly high school students. So we talk to parents about their kids' SAT scores. And we'd say like, oh, what do you want? And the version of their business pain was around like, well, I want my child's scores to improve. And ideally, I'd love you to guarantee that. And I would always say to them look, we had for a while a business guarantee. But I would always say, look, I actually can't guarantee for you anything that's going to happen in the future. And parents are usually like, oh, you're right, okay. I was like, we have evidence that this has worked really consistently with lots of other people, but I can't actually give you anything that's in the future. When we were able to talk to parents about their worry about providing the right support for their child, providing their child the best chance at college, those were things we could address in the sale. That we could actually help you address those personal needs by convincing you that buying this product was going to do those things. That it was going to demonstrate that you'd given the child the best opportunity that you could, that you had set them up for success in the best way that you could. So if you can get to personal pain, it's often easier to sell against. So do we have printouts of the worksheet for today? Oh, okay. Cool. I sent them to Austin maybe around noon. Cool. So we're going to do an exercise in the moment where you're going to get a chance to role play this out. And you are going to get an opportunity it's very, we don't get very often, where you get to be the one that someone is trying to sell to, rather than the one that is trying to convince someone else to buy. So you'll get the joy of that particular role. And what we're going to ask you to do is to actually, you are going to play, each of you, a prospect for your business. And you're going to have someone from another business pretend to be you and ask questions. So the person asking the questions is not going to know anything about your business. So they're going to have to ask open-ended questions because they do not know what the closed-ended questions are, they don't know how to frame them, and they don't know what the answers would be. So you get the chance to see actually what it's like when someone is fully asking open-ended questions because they have no choice in the process. We have some worksheets to plan that out. I'm going to give it like 2 or 3 minutes to see if they get here, and if not, I'll just diagram it out on the board. Any questions for that?
Does personal pain, like I want to compete with this business also in my space, or I want to have the newest technology, or is that more like business pain?
I actually put those up here at this. Because here's the right. Does that have measurable results?
Oh yeah, we have this technology and you don't.
Does that? And so, what would the business result of that be?
Potentially like employee retention or something like that.
So that's when we starting to get to measurable results. If they're things like, oh, we have an employee retention problem. Timing example on that might be, we have an employee retention problem that we need to demonstrate improvement on. Sorry, an employee retention problem. And I might say, oh, tell me about the problem. Oh, what happens if you don't fix that? And then you might get something like, oh, well, if we don't fix it within a year, actually, here's one. If we don't fix it within a year, I don't think our head of HR will still be in place at this company. We're starting to get to here. Go, oh, what happens if that happens? Say, oh, he's my mentor, and if he isn't at the organization anymore, I think that puts my position in jeopardy. That's personal pain. There's another one, of course, that's like, oh, if he's not at the organization anymore, I think I'm next in line for his job. And then you'd be like, so do you really want to fix this problem? Which is a closed-ended question, but if they answer no, then you have your very clear no that is like, well, I don't think we can help you then. But if they answer, like, if you actually get a sense of what these things are, then all of a sudden on that personal pain, actually the job of your product is to help maintain the employment and role of this person's mentor, which is a different problem than is a slightly different problem than helping increase employee retention. Because you could still do this without necessarily having an impact on employee retention. You could still be able to sell something that the company is able to say. Now they're able to say, look, we've deployed this new technology that no one else in the market has. And now you know why that's of value to the organization. It's not because of their ability to deliver measurable results. It's because they believe that this will help increase their status within the organization and hold on to their job. And now you have a reason why having this technology in the organization might be an actual value to someone in it, rather than just, oh, we like to have new technologies.
I'm just going to keep going, sorry. Does personal pain matter if you're not speaking to the authority?
Yes. Yes, it does. And I'll push you. Why?
Well, I mean, you need buy-in from the top and the bottom, sure. But if you're like, oh, I'm solving this person's problem, but the rest of the organization doesn't care about that person.
Yeah. So you may or may not choose to solve that person's problem. I will suggest to you that knowing because people are so deeply motivated by this, that knowing this for as many people as possible helps you understand and sell within the organization, because it will cause people to move and act. Ideally, you want to know this for everyone. So I worked at another company where we did very large team sales. These were multi-$100,000 sales to $100 million and billion-dollar organizations. And we would have, in our good accounts, we would have this mapped out for up to a dozen people. and actually talk through and think through what are all the shifting politics of all the people and what motivates them to act. You had one more question, then we'll move to the.
Is fear a pain? So if you're solving a problem that may happen in the future or may not.
Yes. So fear is often. It's funny. People often want to quantify fear as business pain, but actually fear is almost always a personal pain. And the question is, are they really afraid? So people will often say like, oh, I'm afraid of being overtaken by my competitor. Like, yes, but that doesn't, at least when I think of that, I don't think of that as being here until you have a more specific reason why they're afraid, actually. It's like, I'm afraid of being overtaken by a competitor because my job is on the line. I'm afraid of being overtaken by a competitor because we have a next round of funding coming up, and if we can't demonstrate growth vis-a-vis them, like, we won't get another funding round. But just sort of the general.
Our fear is very, so a ship sinking may call one of our clients and he's got to solve it himself. So we'll solve it for him. Yeah. So it's not a very likely fear, but if it does, he's very. Yeah.
I want to note for everyone else, this is the literal fear of this business. When you say ship sinking, that's not a euphemism. No. Your actual product helps ships from sinking. So.
Yes, the whole crew dead. Yeah. And it's on one guy's shoulders.
So yes, that is real because it has measurable results. And it's very clear, in this case, it is very clear what the personal pain is, because I don't think we need to go into too much detail why, if you are the one person responsible for the loss of an entire ship and the death of the entire crew, that pretty clearly falls under here. So yes, when it's specific like that, yes. And what you're talking about is a kind of fear of a low incidence, high cost thing. And then you have to worry about selling against that, which is just one of those, like, we all have this problem in life. How do we think about things that are very unlikely to happen but are super catastrophic when they do happen? But yes, that's actually very clear about the personal pain here, which is if this happens, you will be possibly out of a job and out of a job, in jail, and the moral burden of that. So yes, sorry, those fears count as very real. I should have asked for the example, because once you get to the example, I think it's much clearer here. So we're going to play this out. I'm just going to borrow yours for a second here. And what I'm going to ask you to do is we'll take just a few moments where you're going to actually role play a prospect. And what I suggest for this is that this is easiest done if you think of an actual successful sale or deal that you've had, because you'll be able to know these probably better often after the deal has happened. If you don't have one, do the best that you can. And so to think about what's the company that you have in mind? Who are you at that company that you're going to play? How would that person describe their job? And then to make up or use as best you know these three levels of pain. What's the stated reason why this meeting is happening? What's the real business pain here? And if you don't know it for the company, make it up, which is helpful to think about what would be a reasonable thing. What would be the measurable business results or external needs that this would need to meet? What's the personal pain? Again, if you don't know this, make this up for the role. And what's the timing? What's a non-arbitrary external constraint on this purchase or sale that you would have? And what I'm going to ask you to do is take a few moments for you to think about your role. And then we're going to get together into groups of 3, and you should get together with 2 other people who do not work in your organization. And you will play this role, and someone else will play you from the company asking them questions. So you're only going to be able to ask open-ended questions. So it says on here, there's the prospect, the company rep, and the observer. Once we go into it, you'll take 5 minutes for each role play, and then spend 5 minutes debriefing it. I have a debrief order here. And really, really just focus on noticing what are the questions that got good substantive responses that you could work with. And notice for yourself, what questions were you asked that got you to open up about these things? So questions before we go into this. All right, I'm going to have you take 3 minutes, 4. You take 4 minutes to put together your role, and then we will take half an hour to go through these groups of 3. So for folks who are on, we'll come back together in 35 minutes as a group here to talk about what people learned from this. All Okay. So what do people notice? What worked well? What were some things you saw folks do that you're like, oh, like that worked well, and I want to think about doing that?
Asking about my teams, what metrics they report to me, and then what I report to my supervisor, and doing the metrics both ways, because our solution does go both ways, right? So understanding how they're different for each.
Yeah. All right. And what do you want to take from that as a lesson? So that's a specific question. What do you think the broader thing we can take from that in general is?
I guess just being aware of who reports to you and who reports up, and just knowing both.
Yeah, so an interesting thing in that question of like, oh, what metrics do you report? You can actually get a bunch of context also on how does the organization work, what are the dynamics work, some potential hints about personal pain, because you can start to see how people relate to each other, and especially if your team's reporting to you different things than you're reporting up, what are the things this person might care about? Also getting at that business pain, which has this concept of having some sort of measurable result associated with it. What else did people see that worked?
I think it worked. So if you're not able to really find like business or personal pain, like one or the other, you're getting a vague kind of answers. So then, not just focusing on business or personal. So maybe you're focusing on business pain, and then you hear like a little hesitation, and then start diving into the personal pain. And then once you nail that down, then you circle back to the business pain, or the other way around.
Yeah, so that it doesn't have to happen in that order. Another thing I want to call out from that is just the listening. The listening for those moments where someone's indicating something that has emotional weight to it, or something that doesn't seem quite right, that those are all signs that there's something there. And it doesn't matter what order you get there in. Usually personal pain is harder to get because it's more personal, but sometimes it can actually be easier to start with that. Like, I'm like super pissed off, or I have this thing that like, if I don't get this done, it's not gonna work. What does that mean for you? Digging on that, and then getting from that a sense of like, okay, how does that relate to the business?
I like this question that we came up with. In this process, what makes you unhappy? What do you experience? What areas do you want to improve?
Yeah. Why do you like that? Why do you think that works?
Because it's a simple question, and it gets direct to the personal pain.
Yeah. One of the things that this activity forces you to do is to ask simple questions, because you don't have enough information to be able to ask complex questions. And one of the things you may have noticed is that out of simple questions, you got very complicated answers. So there's this odd phenomenon that a simple question can actually get a very long and complicated answer. But actually a complex question will tend to get you a simple answer. Yes or no, or a number, and there's a place for that. But where you want to get the more detail, actually, the simpler the question is, the broader it can be.
Well, just building on what the girls over here are saying is that we got good results from sort of mid through the conversation saying, what's the real benefit you're hoping to get? Having asked that previously, but the second time it was really like, okay, now tell me the truth.
And why different when you were doing it in the middle of the conversation rather than at the beginning?
Well, you can't, if you ask that as your first question, they're going to give you the business answer.
Right. Yeah. There's a concept, it's a little woo, but increasingly less so, of an idea of emotional safety. You may have heard various talks about this. It's especially common in talks about teams, that one of the qualities that defines high-performing teams actually doesn't seem to, or early stages research on this, doesn't seem to have a ton to do with specifically how the team is operated. The team can have highly personal relationships or not highly personal relationships. It can be aggressive or not aggressive. But this quality of emotional safety, which is this idea that people feel comfortable saying what is happening, and that people can respond to that in a calm way, that's actually critical to high-performing teams. It's part of what you're trying to create in a sales experience. And it's really hard because it's inherently two people whose goals are not necessarily aligned. And so your ability to make it safe, and then once it is, then it turns out you can ask questions like, what's really going on here? And if you have people you've sold to for years that you have extended relationships with, you can think of the moments where you called up someone who was on the client side or something like that, who you have a personal relationship with, and you were, with a long relationship, you're able to be like, could you tell me like what's really happening here? And because there's that safety, they will tell that to you. In sales, we're trying to build that as fast as possible. What was hard? What did people struggle with?
Well, at least for me, like 5 minutes was not enough to get the information out. But also, how do we manage? Like you told us this a bit, which is like the tone is important when you're asking kind of direct questions. But how do you measure that if like you only have like the 5 minutes or like an elevator like pitch kind of situation?
Yeah. You've asked it to me as a question, so I'll take a stab at attempting to answer, which is, with frankly a non-answer, which tone is really hard. But the tone of these things matters because of this issue of safety. I have one, I told you some of you, which is when I can't remember what my next question is, or I don't have like a good follow-up, I'll just do, oh, say more about that. Which is not actually a question. It is actually a command if you see it written down. And it only works if the other person believes that I genuinely am interested in hearing more about that topic, which I usually am. I find the whole process to be super fascinating. I tap that part of me to be like, I'm super interested. But it's really hard to measure that. And that's the part that's hard for us to train, and actually why I think more and more role play is one of your critical sales tools, because actually getting feedback from other people about like, oh, that tone worked or that tone didn't, is really the only way that I've seen to actually practice this as a muscle. Comment over here.
You had asked what we found hard.
Yeah.
I found it really hard to take my very quick, simple, open question and not keep talking.
Ah, yes.
Like, I would continue to bound it and
Yep.
Yeah.
Can you give us an example, just because I think this is a very common phenomenon, and I want folks to hear how tempting it is.
So tell me how that made you feel. Did you feel? And start filling in the blanks myself.
Why do you think we do that?
Comfort. The first thing that comes to mind is we are uncomfortable with the pause or the silence or the whatever.
Yeah.
I know. Oh, sorry.
Yeah. Oh.
I know I do it usually because I'm trying to get to a conclusion really fast. And so I'm trying to like guide them to be like, yeah, that's the thing I feel.
How does that work for you?
I don't know. I guess it doesn't work.
I'm going to say that I think it might be faster to leave it hanging, but that the reason we think it's an efficiency thing or that we're helping the other person, and that actually what we're trying to do is calm ourselves with the discomfort of a real, like, oh, how do you feel about that? It's actually like a really personal question that you need to signal you're comfortable.
So I often do the opposite. I'll ask a bounded question and then expand it at the end. So what does that mean?
That there are multiple ways to do this and the order does not particularly matter, and it can be done in either order. Are you happy, sad, angry? How do you feel?
Right? Well, 'cause, I mean, what I found is when I've done it that way, people often go completely open-ended. It doesn't seem to actually narrow them in the same way.
So you're saying they respond to it as if it's an open-ended question?
Correct.
Well, I'll do the you're selecting on the result, which is what you'd have to do is do a bunch of ones where you don't bound it at all and see if that gets you a better answer. I think it's worth the practice. It's hard. It's weird to discover that it's not natural in the way that we talk to ask like really simple open-ended questions. I'm going to wrap, and then I'll be around for a few more minutes to answer individual questions of things like this. But things that I hope that you found valuable today is this thinking about just a concept you've probably heard, but even more detail on what does it really mean to ask an open-ended question. And that we know what they are, how hard it is to do that. But that when we do it, we actually get really rich and detailed and varied answers. And then the goal is on us to make it safe to answer those questions. And to start listening for these things, to start listening in those answers for something that feels different so that we can start zeroing in on these things. And the reason for that is because getting clear answers on these is the anchor for what we'll talk about next time, which is closing. Which is that being really clear and getting a lot of clarity on genuinely why are you buying this product? What real pains does this solve? What really is the timing and the constraints that you've articulated? Closing is going to be all about calling those things back together to actually get them to make the initial decision. So thanks for coming out today. Again, I'll be up here for questions for a little while longer, but it's always like such a joy to get to see everyone working on companies, working hard at this skill. It's a really difficult skill, and I wish you all the best in everything that you do. And I hope that some of you will come back in March. Thanks again.